This is an incredibly tense and engaging narrative. I will rewrite it to flow naturally, using proper punctuation and grammar, maintaining the suspense and the core emotional impact, while ensuring it sounds human and is easy to follow. Warning: something was wrong. I stood in the afternoon heat, my shirt clinging to my back, and pushed open the door to my study. My fingers reached for the light switch but froze mid-motion. Something was wrong. It wasn't dramatic, no overturned furniture or shattered glass. But after 40 years of living in this house, 30 of them as a superior court judge, I knew every angle, every shadow, every single detail of this room. The manila folders on my desk were sitting 2 inches left of where I'd placed them. The chair was angled incorrectly. And the filing cabinet, my private filing cabinet, had fresh, tiny scratches around the lock. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat down my water bottle with deliberate care, fighting the urge to rush forward. Instead, I circled the desk slowly, letting my eyes catalog every disturbance. The property deed folder, which I always kept facing forward, now tilted sideways. Tax documents I'd filed chronologically were shuffled. Someone had gone through these papers methodically, attempting to put them back close to their original positions. Close but not perfect. I crouched beside the cabinet, my knees protesting. The lock bore those tiny amateur scratches, probably from a letter opener or a butter knife. I pulled the drawer open. Everything was present, but the order was wrong. My will sat beneath the insurance papers instead of above them. Financial statements showed thumbprints in the margins. Maybe I did this myself, I thought briefly. Moved things in a moment I'd forgotten. I am 67 after all. But even as the thought formed, I dismissed it. 30 years on the bench had taught me to trust evidence over convenient explanations. My mind might be aging, but it wasn't failing. Not yet. I stood there in the silence of my study, holding a folder with someone else's fingerprints on it, and felt a chilling realization. The same cold instinct that helped me catch lying witnesses and spot forged documents was screaming now. The question was, who? Fork and knife with plate, dinner, and a confession. Dinner answered that question without a single word being spoken. I'd taken my usual seat at the head of the table. Edwin, my son, sat to my right, and Euphemia, my daughter-in-law, across from him. The chicken was overcooked. Euphemia had never quite mastered my late wife's recipes, but I cut into it with measured precision, chewing slowly while they made small talk about their day. Then Edwin cleared his throat. Dad, I was thinking, have you updated your will recently? Just want to make sure everything's properly organized. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I set it down with careful control. The metal clicked against the porcelain louder than it should have been. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. His eyes darted to Euphemia, then back to me too quickly. Why do you ask? No reason, just smart planning, you know. At your age. At my age. I let the words hang there, watching a flush creep up his neck. I see. Euphemia leaned forward, her smile warm but her eyes sharp. Wilbert, we only want what's best. Having clear documentation protects everyone. Prevents confusion later. I took a sip of water, giving myself time. I'd spent 3 decades reading body language in courtrooms, and I noticed how her left hand gripped her fork too tightly. The tendons in her wrist stood out like cables. Confusion about what, exactly? She blinked, recovering smoothly. Oh, legal matters. Edwin worries about you living alone in this big house. Does he? It wasn't a question. I picked up my fork again, resumed eating, and let them interpret my silence however they wanted. The rest of the meal crawled past. Later, I pretended to watch the evening news while actually studying their reflections in the darkened window behind the television. They sat close on the couch, heads together, their voices low. Euphemia touched Edwin's arm, a gesture of reassurance or perhaps conspiracy. Edwin nodded, glanced toward me, then quickly away when he thought I might notice. They thought I was just watching TV. They had no idea I was building a case. Kitchen knife the plan. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, unable to sleep. My son. My own son, the boy I'd raised and put through law school, now sitting in my living room, plotting what? To have me declared incompetent and seize my assets? The house alone was worth over $1 million in the Scottsdale market. The life insurance, the retirement accounts, the land my father left me, plenty of motivation for someone without patience. I was up before dawn, moving through the quiet house like a ghost. I found the mail in its usual spot. Edwin must have brought it in yesterday. I sorted through the stack with careful attention. 3 envelopes had been opened and crudely resealed. 2 tax-related letters I'd been expecting were missing entirely. I pulled out my phone and checked the postal tracking app. Both missing letters showed as delivered 3 days ago. My hands trembled as I photographed the opened envelopes. Then I studied them. No room for emotion now. Only evidence, observation, planning. I stood before the violated filing cabinet and let the rage wash through me, then locked it away. 30 years of watching people lie taught me one thing. Everyone has a tell. Edwin's was always in his eyes. Tonight, he couldn't hold my gaze for more than 3 seconds. The pieces were assembling themselves in my mind like a legal brief. Motive, money, opportunity, living in my house, method, gathering information, building leverage. They thought I was just a tired old man who wouldn't notice his own life being stolen. I sank into my desk chair and spoke quietly into the empty room. They think I'm just a tired old man. They're about to learn what 3 decades in a courtroom teaches you. The plan began forming, not revenge, not yet. First, I needed information. I needed to be invisible. I needed them to think they'd won, that I was out of the way so they could act freely. They wanted me gone? Fine. I'd disappear. But not the way they hoped. I pulled out a notepad and began making lists. Supplies I'd need, places I could watch from, people who owed me favors. The machinery of my counterattack clicked into place with the precision I'd once used to dismantle defense strategies. By the time the sun rose over the desert, casting long shadows across my study floor, I knew exactly what I was going to do. They had opened a door into darkness, thinking they'd find a helpless old man. Instead, they were going to find a judge. And this time, I wasn't bound by rules of evidence. This time, the verdict would be mine alone to deliver. National Park setting the trap. After 2 days of planning and playing the oblivious retiree, I was ready to set the trap. Sitting at the breakfast table with Edwin and Euphemia, I buttered my toast slowly and took a deliberate sip of coffee. "I've been thinking about that Grand Canyon trip we always talked about," I announced, setting the cup down with casual precision. "I'm going to do it. 2 weeks starting today." Edwin's fork clattered against his plate. "Today? That's sudden." I shrugged, reaching for the jam. "I'm retired. No time like the present. Your mother always wanted to see it. Figured I'd finally do it for her." The emotion in that last sentence was calculated, true enough to be believable, strategic enough to deflect suspicion. I watched them process it, catching the quick, loaded glance they exchanged. Euphemia recovered first, leaning forward with manufactured warmth. "That's wonderful, Wilbert. You deserve a break. Don't worry about anything here. Don't worry about anything here." The words hung in the air like a confession. I nodded slowly, studying my plate as if considering logistics rather than reading her face. She was already planning. I could see it in the way her fingers drummed once against the table, an unconscious gesture of impatience barely suppressed. "You sure you're okay driving alone?" Edwin asked, trying to sound concerned. "Long trip for," he trailed off, realizing the trap he'd walked into. "For someone my age?" I let a sharp edge creep into my voice, watching him flinch. "I'll be fine. Been driving these roads for 40 years. I softened deliberately, giving him an exit. The relief on his face was almost painful to witness. My own son, grateful I wasn't going to make this difficult for him, grateful for the opportunity to rob me. I spent the morning playing the role of enthusiastic traveler, scattering hiking boots and camera equipment around the dining table. Buried among the tourist supplies, however, I packed other things. Binoculars with night vision capability, my old case notebook, and a small digital camera. The tools of investigation hidden beneath the costume of leisure. At lunch, I traced my planned route across the map. Route 17 north, probably stop in Flagstaff the first night, then west to the canyon. "Sounds perfect," Euphemia said, but her eyes weren't following the route. She was looking at me, measuring how long I'd be gone. 2 weeks should be enough, I continued. "Maybe I'll extend it if the weather's good. Been so long since I just existed somewhere without obligations." "Take all the time you need," Edwin said, too quickly, too eagerly. Crescent moon the reveal. The afternoon heat was brutal, $108 /circ$F, the kind of Scottsdale summer day that makes the air shimmer. I loaded the truck, moving slowly, partly for effect. Edwin came out to help carry the heavier items. I let him, watching how his movements were stiff with guilt and anticipation warring inside him. When everything was loaded, he moved in for a hug. "Take care of things here," I said quietly into his shoulder. "We will, Dad. We will." Euphemia waited by the door and I accepted her kiss. Her perfume was expensive, sharper than I remembered, purchased with anticipated money. The thought was acid in my mind, but I kept my face neutral. "Enjoy yourself, Wilbert. You've earned this." I climbed into the truck and pulled away. In the rearview mirror, the moment they thought I couldn't see anymore, their faces changed. Edwin's arm went around Euphemia's waist. She said something that made him laugh. They were celebrating. 20 miles east, not north. The desert and motel sat off Highway 87. I checked in under the name James Morrison, a defendant I'd once acquitted. The room was exactly what I expected. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited for darkness. After 3 hours, the sun finally sank. I waited another 2 hours until full darkness settled. Then I drove back, taking side streets until I was 3 blocks from my house. I parked in the shadows beneath a eucalyptus tree and walked carefully through the warm night. The vacant house across from mine had been for sale for 6 months. I found the lockbox on the front door and input the code I'd memorized from the realtor's sign, 4732. The house smelled of dust and abandonment. I moved through it without lights, finding the front bedroom with its clear view of my own home. Every window over there blazed with light. Both cars were in the driveway. I set up my camping chair and pulled out the binoculars. I raised them to my eyes and there they were, through my own living room window. Edwin was pacing. Euphemia sat on the couch, phone pressed to her ear, coordinating something. Someone. Then I heard a faint tapping from the window of the vacant house. I turned sharply. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, stood in the shadows of the porch next door. She took me by the hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "At midnight," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "you will see and understand everything." She gave my hand a final squeeze and disappeared back into the darkness. I was chilled despite the heat. I returned to my observation post, the minutes crawling toward midnight. My focus was absolute. At 11:58 p.m., a black sedan pulled up to my house, parking behind Edwin's car. A man in a dark suit got out and walked straight to the front door, carrying a large briefcase. Euphemia opened the door before he even knocked. They all went straight into my study. I adjusted the binoculars using the night vision. The man opened the briefcase and spread out documents. Edwin and Euphemia stood over him, talking frantically. I watched Edwin point to a paragraph on one paper, then emphatically tap the table. Then the true shock. The man in the suit reached into his briefcase and pulled out a large, official-looking document with a prominent gold seal. He slid it across the desk toward Edwin, who grabbed a pen and without hesitation, signed the document. But it wasn't the signature that made my world turn upside down. It was the sight of Euphemia, my daughter-in-law, walking over to my desk chair, pulling off the cover, and retrieving something from beneath the cushion. She handed it to the man in the suit. It was my spare key to the private filing cabinet. The man in the suit didn't put it in the lock. Instead, he pulled out a small, heavy wrench and calmly smashed the cabinet lock until the drawer sprang open. Edwin and Euphemia cheered, a silent, ecstatic gesture I saw through the glass. They didn't want information or leverage. They wanted documents I had hidden. The man pulled out a single, thin folder and handed it to Edwin. Edwin opened it, scanned the contents, and then, with a twisted grin, shredded the entire folder right there, tossing the pieces into my trash can. I realized then what had happened. They weren't just trying to steal my assets. They were trying to destroy evidence. Evidence I didn't even know existed. But what evidence? As I stared, completely stunned, the clock on my wall, visible through the window, ticked to midnight. Suddenly, the lights in the study went out. Edwin and Euphemia frantically stumbled toward the window. Then, a voice boomed from a speaker I couldn't see, placed somewhere outside my house. "Edwin and Euphemia, this is Judge Carstairs. The house, the assets, and the evidence are secured. The police are on their way. Your trial begins now." The sound of sirens started immediately, growing rapidly louder as they turned onto my street. I slumped back in the camping chair, the binoculars falling into my lap, the wrenching sound of the smashed lock echoing in my mind. The shocking truth wasn't just that my son betrayed me. It was the depth of the conspiracy, that they weren't just after my money, but were desperately trying to cover up a crime far worse that Helen or my career must have been connected to. The police lights flashed across the vacant room. I took one last look at my house, now surrounded by flashing blue and red, and fainted from the overwhelming shock and realization hourglass not done the midnight meeting. The pieces were moving into position. Georgiana poured more coffee and offered me a sandwich. I ate without tasting it, my eyes never leaving those windows. Hours crawled past. 10 o'clock, 11. The neighborhood settled into sleep, lights going dark house by house, except mine. Edwin and Euphemia remained awake, moving between rooms, checking their phones, looking out windows, waiting. At 11:40, Georgiana touched my arm. Soon. My heart hammered against my ribs. 3 days of watching, and now the moment approached. What would I see? How extensive was their plan? How complete was my son's betrayal? The questions circled in my mind like vultures. Then, at 11:47 p.m., headlights swept down the street. Georgiana touched my arm again. "Here we go," she whispered. A black sedan slowed and turned into my driveway. The engine cut and the door opened. A man emerged, wearing a business suit despite the hour, a leather briefcase in hand. He checked his watch, looking around with the cautious awareness of someone who knew the late hour was unusual. My front door opened before he could knock. Edwin must have been watching for him. They exchanged brief, low words on the porch, then both disappeared inside. The door closed. Through the living room window I could see 3 figures now. I raised my binoculars. Georgiana raised her phone. We didn't discuss our roles, we simply fell into them, documentation happening automatically between us. Evidence gathering. Witness testimony. Building a case without speaking the words. Through my living room window, I watched a meeting begin at my own dining table. The man with the briefcase sat down, Edwin across from him. Euphemia appeared from the hallway carrying a folder. I recognized it immediately, red, worn at the edges, the one from my violated private filing cabinet. "That's him," Georgiana whispered. "That's Chavez." I lowered the binoculars just long enough to look at her. "You're certain?" I looked up his real estate license after his second visit. Luis Chavez, commercial and residential. The name settled into my memory like evidence filed in a case folder. Luis Chavez, real estate agent, meeting in my house at midnight with my son and daughter-in-law, with my private documents spread across my dining table. "Smart thinking," I said quietly. "Document everything," she replied. "You'll need it." I raised my phone and began taking photographs. The distance made some shots blurry and the window glass added glare, but enough came through clear, time-stamped and dated, proof that this meeting happened, that these people gathered, that my papers changed hands without my knowledge or consent. 30 years of judicial work had taught me one fundamental truth: evidence matters more than emotion. Whatever I felt watching this scene and the feelings threatened to choke me had to wait. Right now, only documentation mattered. The meeting stretched on. Chavez examined documents, holding them up to the light, occasionally checking signatures or watermarks for authenticity. Edwin's body language screamed nervousness, shoulders hunched, hands fidgeting, unable to maintain eye contact. But Euphemia sat confident and still, watching Chavez with the patience of someone certain of their position. Papers were signed, hands shook across the table. Then Euphemia disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a bottle and 3 glasses. Champagne. A small celebration. They toasted. Chavez laughed at something Edwin said. They were celebrating in my house, with my papers, planning my destruction over drinks. I lowered my phone. My hands trembled, not from cold, but from fury held in check by sheer force of will. Georgiana's hand touched my shoulder briefly. "Keep photographing," she whispered. "Evidence, not emotion." She was right. I raised the phone again, capturing the toast, the smiles, the confidence in their faces, every detail that would matter later when this ended up where I knew it would, in a courtroom. Collision, the final betrayal. At 12:45 a.m., Chavez stood and gathered his briefcase. The 3 of them moved toward the front door. Georgiana and I quietly pushed the vacant house's window open wider. The warm June night carried the sound better than I'd hoped. The street was silent except for the distant freeway hum. Chavez's voice reached us clearly. "If the power of attorney is legitimate, we close by July 15th. Buyers offering $/$650, $000 cash." The words landed like physical blows. Power of attorney. Closing. Cash sale. They weren't just planning to steal my house, they were actively selling it. Edwin's response made it worse. "It's legitimate. My father signed it months ago." The lie. The absolute, complete lie. I'd signed nothing, authorized nothing, given no permission for any of this. "I'll need to verify with the title company," Chavez continued. "But we're on track." Euphemia's voice, smooth and confident, cut through. "Everything's in order. We've been planning this carefully." Planning carefully. The words echoed in my mind. While I'd walked through my days trusting them, they'd been planning carefully, methodically, the theft of everything I'd built. The door closed. The sedan's engine started. Tail lights disappeared down the street. The neighborhood returned to silence, but nothing would ever be silent again in my mind. I stood at the window, phone in hand, photographs stored, evidence collected. Georgiana was beside me, her notebook full of times and descriptions. "He signed it months ago," I said, my voice barely controlled. I signed nothing. Forgery? Georgiana asked. Has to be. Question is, how good a forgery? I turned from the window, feeling something settle inside me. The shock was gone. The denial was gone. Only cold certainty remained. Let them think they're succeeding. Then show them what happens when you underestimate a judge. Detective building the case. Dawn broke over the desert, and I sat in the motel room, still dressed from the surveillance, phone in my hand, displaying the midnight photographs. Beside me, Georgiana's notebook lay open to her precise observations. Luis Chavez's words, $$$650,000, July 15th, power of attorney, echoed in my skull like a gavel strike. Knowing they were selling wasn't enough. I needed to see the documents themselves, understand the architecture of their deception. A case built on observation alone was weak. I needed the smoking gun, the forged signature, the fraudulent paperwork, the proof that would withstand scrutiny in any courtroom. I spent 3 days studying their patterns from my surveillance position. Edwin left for his downtown office every morning at 8:30 a.m. like clockwork. Euphemia went shopping on Tuesdays and Thursdays, usually gone at least 2 hours. Today was Thursday, July 6th, my window of opportunity. I watched from my pickup truck, parked 2 blocks down. Edwin's silver sedan backed out of the driveway at 8:27 a.m. 43 minutes later, Euphemia's black SUV followed. I waited 10 more minutes to be absolutely certain they wouldn't return. Then I drove to my own house, parked in the driveway like I belonged there, and pulled out my key. The lock turned smoothly. My own house, my own door. Yet my hands trembled slightly as I pushed it open. The guest room, which they had converted into Edwin's temporary office, held the usual debris of modern work. I opened drawers systematically. Then the bottom drawer. And there it was. The red folder from the midnight meeting with Chavez. It wasn't even locked, just sitting there, buried under some manila envelopes. The arrogance of their confidence made my jaw clench. I spread the contents across the desk surface. The power of attorney document was dated May 20th. My signature was at the bottom, except it wasn't my signature. It was close, very close. Someone had studied my handwriting carefully. But the pressure points were wrong, the loop on the L in Lawrence didn't quite match, and most tellingly, the ink appeared newer than the paper. Close, I murmured aloud, photographing it from multiple angles. But the L in Lawrence, I loop it differently. And the date ink was sloppy. Probably an online forgery service. They'd claim I was senile if challenged, that I had signed but forgotten. I continued scanning the documents, finding the sales agreement for the house and multiple draft contracts. They were ready to move. I turned from the desk, gathering the folder. The shock had given way to an unwavering resolve. They had given me everything I needed. Classical building, the verdict is mine. That day I called Marcus Webb, a lawyer who had practiced before me for years and owed me a significant favor. I need someone who specializes in financial fraud and forgery, I told him. And I need absolute discretion. I have the evidence, I continued. Photographs, witness testimony, and the forged power of attorney document itself. The closing date is July 15th. We have less than 3 weeks to file an emergency injunction and prepare criminal charges. The reality of what I was doing settled over me. You know what this means? Georgiana had asked. You'll have to prosecute your own son. The words hung in the air. I had been avoiding that truth. This path led to criminal charges. Fraud, forgery, theft. If I saw this through, Edwin would face prison time. My son, the boy I'd raised, stood beside at his wedding. I looked at the forged signature on the power of attorney. He had made his choice when he decided to steal from me. I was making mine when I decided to stop him. We will let them take every step they've planned, I told Marcus Webb. They're going to close. Sign all the papers. Except the money. Then I'm going to take it all away and send them to prison for it. I returned to the vacant house to wait, the final stage of my plan underway. They would not know the judge was watching until the gavel fell that it wouldn't work, not against the evidence I was collecting. I photographed every page. The power of attorney. The preliminary sales agreement with the buyer, Richard Thompson from California. The closing date was July 18th, not the 15th Chavez had mentioned, a 3-day difference I duly noted. The purchase price was confirmed, $650,000, a cash sale. Then, as I was about to replace everything, printed pages slipped from between 2 folders. Email correspondence. I almost missed them. The first line froze me in place. Marcus, once the sale closes, I'll have my half. $325,000. Enough to start over. I read, phone forgotten in my hand, Euphemia's emails to someone in Los Angeles. Her plans were detailed with brutal efficiency. After the closing, she'd take the children, leave Edwin, and move to California, where this Marcus person waited. Edwin believed they were buying a new house in Scottsdale together. Edwin thinks we're buying a house here. He has no idea I'm leaving. My son was being used, a tool, a disposable means to an end. The realization should have brought satisfaction. Karma, perhaps. Instead, it just deepened the hollow ache in my chest. Betrayal all the way down. Him betraying me. Or betraying him. Everyone using everyone. But it didn't change anything. He'd chosen this path, made his decisions. That he was also a victim of manipulation didn't absolve him of his actions against me. I photographed the emails, every page, every damning word, then carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. The folder back in the drawer, angled the same way, the emails between the manila envelopes, the desk surface cleared. Walking through the house one final time, I let myself look at it properly, built 30 years ago, every corner familiar. Memories poisoned by present betrayal. I left through the back door and drove back to the motel without looking in the rearview mirror. Shield building the fortress. In the motel room, I spread everything out. Phone connected to the laptop, transferring photographs. Georgiana's notebook cross-referenced with my new evidence. The picture was complete now. Documentation, proof, the kind that survived appeals and cross-examination. I called Georgiana, my voice steadier than I felt. I have everything. Documents, evidence, proof of forgery. They're selling it July 18th. You went inside? Her concern was immediate. My house, my evidence. Time to build a prosecution. I stared at the forged signature on my screen, at the careful but flawed reproduction of my handwriting, and felt the last traces of pain burn away into something colder, purer. They'd wanted to play games with a judge. Fine. Court was now in session. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about building an airtight case, the kind I'd spent 30 years constructing from the bench. I never lost cases where the evidence was this clear. The next morning, I dressed in a full navy blue suit, a conservative tie, and polished shoes. Looking in the bathroom mirror, I saw Judge Lawrence returning. Not the confused homeowner, but the man who had presided over hundreds of trials. I packed my evidence folder in a briefcase and drove into Central Scottsdale. Step 1. Laying the foundation, the affidavit. I visited Margaret Chin, a notary I'd known for 15 years through the court system. I slid a handwritten affidavit across her desk. I need this notarized and filed. She read it slowly, eyes widening. This states you never signed a power of attorney. Correct. Never executed one. Never authorized anyone to act on my behalf regarding my property. Someone's using forged documents. She typed the official version, had me sign under oath, and applied her notary seal. The stamp's thud sounded like a gavel strike. This is serious, Wilbert. I know. Foundation laid. Step 2, the banking barrier, the hold. From the notary, I drove directly to Desert Vista Bank. Thomas Burke, the branch manager, was a man I'd known for 20 years. I need to place a formal hold on any real estate transactions involving my property, I told him. Attempted fraudulent sale documents with forged authorization. You're certain? He asked. 30 years as a judge teaches you to recognize forged signatures. I'm certain. He typed rapidly. Hold placed immediately. No transfers without you physically present. Photo ID verified. Second barrier erected. Step 3, the irrevocable defense, the trust. After a quick lunch, I drove to the office of Catherine Morrison, a trust and estate attorney. I told her I wanted absolute asset protection immediately. She suggested an irrevocable living trust. How quickly can this be established? I asked. I can draft it today. File with the county by end of business. I told her the date of establishment, May 15th, a date carefully chosen to predate Edwin's forged power of attorney, which was dated May 20th. 2 hours later, she finalized the documents. By 4 p.m., my house legally existed within an irrevocable trust, with me as the sole trustee. Edwin's forged document, dated after the trust was established, was worthless. You can't sell property you don't control. The legal trap had sprung before they even knew it existed. Microphone the final performance. That evening, I returned to the motel, transforming it into a war room, organizing evidence into labeled folders. I called Georgiana. Legal framework is in place. Properties in trust, banks locked down, forgeries documented. When will you confront them? She asked. July 18th. At the closing table. Why wait? Maximum impact. Let them think they've won, then watch their world collapse in public. That's justice. My pickup truck turned into my driveway on July 14th, 2 days before the closing. The Arizona sun blazed. My house sat exactly as I'd left it, but everything was different now. I knew the betrayal that lived inside those walls, and they didn't know I knew. I fumbled my keys slightly, calculated clumsiness, and pushed the door open. I'm home. Trip didn't work out. Edwin appeared from the kitchen, his face frozen in surprise before he forced a smile. Dad, you're back early? Everything all right? Altitude got to me, headaches. Figured I'd be more comfortable here. The psychological warfare. That evening's dinner became psychological warfare. Edwin launched his attack disguised as concern. Dad, I've been meaning to mention, you seem a bit forgetful lately. I set my fork down. Forgetful how? Little things, misplacing items, confusion about dates. Euphemia leaned forward. It's natural at your age. Maybe see a doctor just to be safe. My hand slipped into my pocket and pressed record on my phone. They were building the foundation for their defense. Old man didn't know what he was signing, dementia. I let uncertainty show on my face. Do I really seem that confused? The next day at lunch, Euphemia sprung the real trap. Wilbert, remember those papers from last month? Legal documents. Papers? What papers? I furrowed my brow, appearing to strain for memory. Power of attorney forms. You signed them for Edwin to help with finances. Did I sign something? I can't, it's fuzzy. The triumph that flashed across Euphemia's face was barely concealed. Edwin relaxed visibly. They believed they had successfully planted reasonable doubt about my mental state. They thought they were building an unassailable defense. Instead, every word was being recorded, every false accusation of dementia, evidence that they knew the power of attorney was unauthorized and were trying to create cover after the fact. Later that night, I passed their bedroom door and heard their voices. He doesn't even remember signing, Edwin said, low and relieved. Perfect. If he challenges anything, we cite cognitive decline. 3 more days, then we're free. I stood in the darkened hallway, recording their conversation. They had no idea I was there. No idea every word was evidence. No idea the trap had already closed around them. Checkered flag closing day. Friday morning arrived. I dressed in my courtroom suit, navy blue, perfect Windsor knot, shoes polished. I picked up my leather briefcase, the one I'd carried for 30 years, on the bench. Inside, the labeled folders contained evidence that would destroy them. I walked into the kitchen where they sat over coffee. I have some errands to run. Be back later. They smiled, relieved. They thought I was going to the bank or the grocery store. Harmless old man activities. In 4 hours, they'd be at the escrow office, expecting to sign away my home and collect $$650,000. Instead, they'd face the consequences of betraying a judge. I drove toward Scottsdale with the cold, calm focus of a prosecutor about to present an unbeatable case. No anxiety, no doubt. The legal fortress was complete. The trap works best when the prey doesn't see it until too late. And I had spent 30 years learning exactly how to set traps that never failed. The time for doubt was long past. There was just the certainty that comes from 3 decades of legal experience and evidence so solid it could withstand any challenge. They wanted to play games. Fine. Court was now in session. And I never lost cases where the evidence was this clear. Collision: the confrontation at escrow. Desert Sun Escrow occupied the 2nd floor of a modern office building in North Scottsdale. At 1:50 p.m., through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see them gathered around the table. Luis Chavez sat at the head, organizing documents. Edwin and Euphemia sat on the left, their professional attire doing little to hide their nervous energy. Richard Thompson, the California buyer, sat opposite them, a distinguished man in an expensive suit. Sarah Martinez, the escrow officer, arranged paperwork at the far end. Everything was proceeding normally, just another real estate closing. I checked my watch. 2 p.m. exactly. Catherine Morrison stood beside me in the hallway, her own briefcase in hand. Ready? I've been ready for 2 weeks. I opened the conference room door. All heads turned and the conversations died instantly. I saw Edwin's face drain of color. Euphemia half rose from her chair before regaining control. Chavez looked confused, Thompson annoyed, and Martinez concerned. I walked to the empty end of the table. Morrison followed me. I didn't remove my jacket. I simply set my briefcase down with a decisive click that echoed in the suddenly silent room. Good afternoon. My voice carried the authority of 3 decades from the bench. I'm Wilbert Lawrence, the actual owner of the property you are attempting to purchase. Wilbert. Euphemia stood. What are you doing here? I ignored her, addressing Martinez directly. This transaction cannot proceed. The power of attorney you are relying on is forged. Edwin's voice shook. Dad, this isn't. Be quiet, Edwin. I'm presenting evidence now. I opened my briefcase, removed the first folder labeled affidavit, and placed it directly in front of Martinez. Here is my sworn statement that I never executed any power of attorney, nor authorized anyone to conduct transactions involving my property. Morrison took the second folder labeled trust and handed it to Martinez. Mr. Lawrence's property was transferred into an irrevocable living trust on May 15th, 1 month before the alleged power of attorney date. As sole trustee, Mr. Lawrence is the only person authorized to conduct transactions involving this property. Here is the county filing. Martinez examined the documents, checking dates and filing stamps. She looked up at Chavez. Did you verify the trust status before proceeding? Chavez's face was pale. The power of attorney appeared legitimate. Standard documentation. Standard would include a title search revealing the trust, Morrison interrupted calmly. Thompson stood abruptly. You told me this was clean. This is fraud. I'm calling my attorney. Euphemia tried one last time. This is a misunderstanding. Wilbert signed but is confused. His memory. I pulled out my phone. Let me clarify my memory. I tapped the screen twice. Euphemia's voice filled the room, clear and damning. If he challenges anything, we cite cognitive decline. Edwin's voice. 3 more days, then we're clear. Euphemia again. Then we're free. I stopped the playback. The silence was absolute. Does that sound like someone who innocently believed I signed documents? I removed the third folder, evidence, and opened it so everyone could see. Surveillance photographs, timestamps, your midnight meeting with Mr. Chavez on July 2nd. The documents spread across my dining table. Edwin signing papers. Euphemia presenting my private files from my broken safe. I swiped through the photos on my phone, projecting them onto my laptop screen. Each image was undeniable. Thompson studied the photos, then turned to Chavez with disgust. This is fraud. I was provided falsified documents. They misrepresented. We didn't know. Edwin started. You broke into my safe, my voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Forged my signature, met with Mr. Chavez at midnight while you thought I was away. You knew exactly what you were doing. Euphemia's face hardened into defiance. You can't prove. I opened the fourth folder, analysis. Comparative signature analysis. Note the pressure differences. The loop formation on the L, in Lawrence. The ink age discrepancy. I laid it on the table. What can I prove? Martinez closed her file folder with finality. This closing cannot proceed. I am required to report suspected fraud to authorities. Thompson was already gathering his things. Chavez, you assured me the documentation was verified. I'll be speaking with my attorney about your negligence. Edwin found his voice finally. Dad, please. We can fix this. Just talk to us. I began collecting my folders, returning them to my briefcase in perfect order. I spent 30 years determining consequences for people who broke the law. That doesn't change because you're my son. I'm still your family. I paused, looked at him directly across the table, and held his gaze until he looked away. You stopped being my family when you tried to steal my home. Now you're just defendants. I closed my briefcase with a final, decisive click. Ms. Martinez, you'll have my cooperation with any investigation. To Mr. Thompson, I apologize. You were drawn into this. Morrison opened the door. I walked through it without looking back. Behind us, voices erupted in panic, recrimination, and blame shifting. Edwin called my name once. I didn't turn around. Oncoming police car accountability. In the elevator, Morrison spoke quietly. That was devastating. That was justice. What's next? Police station to file criminal complaints, then the bank to secure new accounts, then home to change the locks. I watched the floor numbers descend. They're not welcome anymore. At the Scottsdale Police Department, Detective Maria Rodriguez sat across from me, reviewing my evidence folder. I laid out the case, the forged power of attorney, the signature analysis, the surveillance photos, the audio recordings of them discussing my cognitive decline. Rodriguez's expression hardened. Mr. Lawrence, you're accusing your own son of felony fraud. I'm reporting a crime that happens to involve my son. Some fathers would let this go. Some fathers didn't spend 30 years upholding the law. I'm not that father. Over the following week, the consequences escalated. Edwin quickly confessed during interrogation. Euphemia denied everything until confronted with her California emails, then she immediately blamed Edwin. The marriage was over, she had already filed for divorce, Rodriguez informed me. The eviction hearing came on July 29. Judge Sarah Chin, my former clerk, granted the eviction swiftly, 10 days to vacate. On August 1st, moving day, I watched from my study as they loaded a rental truck. When nearly finished, Edwin came to the door alone. "Dad, please give me another chance." I studied the man who had broken into my safe. "You made calculated choices, Edwin. You chose this path. You're my father. I was your father. You made me a victim instead." I closed the door, locked it, and changed all the locks. The criminal case moved towards sentencing. August 28th arrived. I dressed in my courtroom suit and drove downtown to watch my son and his wife receive their judgment. I sat in the gallery of courtroom 4B. Judge Michael Harrison entered. The clerk called the case. Edwin stood first, voice barely audible, confirming his guilt. Euphemia followed, stronger but defiant. Harrison read portions of my victim impact statement aloud. "For 30 years I upheld the law from this bench. They broke into my safe, forged my signature, attempted to steal my home while I slept under its roof. The relationship doesn't excuse the crime. It makes it worse." Harrison's voice was firm. "This court takes family fraud seriously. You exploited trust, forged documents, and attempted to steal from someone who had given you shelter." Edwin Lawrence, 18 months supervised probation, 200 hours community service, $$$15,000 fine, and $$$50,000 in restitution. Euphemia Lawrence, 2 years probation, 300 hours community service, $$$25,000 fine, $$$50,000 restitution, and a 5-year ban from real estate. The gavel came down. I walked out without looking back. On the courthouse steps, Georgiana waited. Justice prevailed. "As it always does," I replied. "Sometimes it just needs assistance." I drove home through familiar Scottsdale streets. In my driveway, I sat quietly before getting out. 30 years on the bench. Never thought my own son would stand where defendants stood. He'd had every advantage. He chose greed instead. I'd chosen justice. That was the difference between us. I walked to my door. New locks, empty rooms, peace restored. I'd lost my son. That hurt. It would always hurt. But I'd kept my dignity, my home, and my self-respect. Justice isn't always kind, but it's always right. I made coffee and opened my laptop to research volunteer legal programs for seniors. Transforming pain into purpose. They tried to make me a victim. I'd refused. That refusal, that was the real victory. The house was quiet, mine alone now. Safe, defended home. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.